Chasing the Heart. Chapter 1. The Illusion of Perfect Love. Sarah adjusted the picture frame on the mantelpiece. A family portrait taken 2 summers ago in Central Park. In the photograph, she and David sat close together. Their 2 children, Emma, 8, and Noah, 5, squeezed between them. They were smiling. The kind of smile people put on when someone says, "Say cheese." For anyone who visited their Manhattan apartment, it was the image of a perfect family. But Sarah knew how deceptive photographs could be. David was in the other room, hunched over his laptop as always, papers spread out across the dining table. The light of his screen flickered on his face, and even from where she stood, she could see the tension in his jaw. He hadn't kissed her goodnight in weeks. They slept in the same bed but on separate islands, separated by silence that stretched like an ocean. At first, Sarah had explained it away. Work is stressful, he's just tired. But months had passed, then years, and the excuses ran out. What remained was an emptiness she carried in her chest, a hollow ache she couldn't shake. They had been college sweethearts, full of laughter and long walks through Washington Square Park. Sneaking pizza slices at 2 a.m., they used to talk about everything: dreams, fears, what they'd name their kids. Sarah had thought she'd found her forever. But now, David was more of a roommate than a partner. That evening, after putting the kids to bed, Sarah walked into the dining room and leaned against the doorway. "David," she said softly. He replied without looking up. Do you even see me anymore?" His fingers froze on the keyboard. Slowly, he glanced up, his eyes tired. "What do you mean?" "I mean," her voice wavered, "you don't talk to me. You don't touch me. I feel like I'm invisible." David sighed, rubbing his temples. "Sarah, please. I'm under so much pressure right now. The promotion, the bills, the kids. Can't you understand that?" Her throat tightened. "I understand stress. What I don't understand is why I don't matter anymore." He shook his head, already looking back at the screen. "Not tonight, please." And that was it. Conversation over. Sarah walked back to their bedroom, shut the door, and let the tears come silently, so the children wouldn't hear. She curled up on the bed, staring at the ceiling. The love she once felt seemed like a distant memory, blurred and unreachable. She wanted to believe marriages had seasons, that passion fades, but companionship deepens. She wanted to believe it was normal, but the truth was, she felt utterly alone. That night, with her phone in hand and her heart aching for connection, she opened the App Store. Her finger hovered, hesitating, before tapping download on a dating app she had never imagined she would touch. She told herself it wasn't serious. She wasn't looking for an affair. She just wanted to know she still existed to someone. Somewhere. Chapter 2. Echoes and Silence. The glow from Sarah's phone was the only light in the room. David had fallen asleep instantly, his back turned toward her as always. His steady breathing filled the silence, but to her, it sounded like distance, a wall between them. She scrolled through profiles absent-mindedly. Most were predictable. Men holding fish, men at the gym, men with forced grins beside cars or drinks. She smirked at some, swiped past most. She wasn't really searching for anyone. What she longed for was something simpler, a message that said, "You matter. I see you." The first notifications came quickly. "Hey beautiful. You're gorgeous. Want to chat? Damn. You're hot." Sarah rolled her eyes. Empty words. Attention, yes, but it wasn't what her heart craved. Still, there was a thrill in knowing someone out there had noticed her, even if it was shallow. For a few nights, she chatted casually, keeping conversations light, never revealing much. But the ache inside her deepened. Every time she closed the app, The apartment seemed colder. The next weekend, she tried again with David. "Do you remember?" she asked him over dinner. "When we used to stay up until sunrise just talking about everything and nothing." David glanced up from his plate. "That was college, Sarah. We're not kids anymore." Her fork paused mid-air. "So what are we now? Strangers?" His tone sharpened. "Can't you just be content? We have a good life. A nice apartment. 2 healthy kids. Why are you always looking for problems?" Her chest tightened. "I'm not looking for problems, David. I'm looking for us." He pushed back from the table. "I don't have time for this." And just like that, he left the room. Sarah sat frozen, the clink of silverware still echoing in her ears. The silence that followed was louder than any fight. It was a silence that said, "You are alone in this marriage." Later that night, when the kids were asleep, she opened the app again, not to flirt, not to escape, but to pour out the ache inside her chest. And that was when she stumbled across a message that didn't look like the others. It was simple. "You seem sad. Are you okay?" Her fingers hovered over the screen. Something in those words disarmed her. No pickup line, no fake charm. Just a question. She typed back slowly. "I don't know. Maybe not." The reply came quickly. "Sometimes it helps to talk. I'm Michael, by the way." Michael. Just a name on a screen. But somehow it carried more warmth than David had offered in months. Sarah hesitated, then replied, "I'm Sarah." And with that, a door opened, a small crack of light in the darkness she'd been living in. Chapter 3. The app that changed everything. It started with small exchanges, simple words passed across a screen. Sarah hadn't expected much from Michael, but his questions were different. They weren't about her looks or whether she was single. They were about her. What makes you feel alive? When was the last time you laughed until you cried? If you could change one thing in your life right now, what would it be? At first, she answered cautiously, still afraid of revealing too much. But Michael had a way of listening even through text. He didn't rush to respond with his own stories or opinions. He let her unravel, piece by piece, like someone gently holding a tangled thread until it smoothed. One night, lying in bed while David snored beside her, Sarah confessed something she had never said aloud. "Sometimes I feel like I don't exist, like I'm invisible in my own home." Michael's reply came after a pause. "You exist. I see you. And you deserve more than invisibility." Her eyes stung with tears. She pressed the phone to her chest, afraid of how much those words meant to her. Over the next weeks, their conversations deepened. She told him about Emma's love for painting, Noah's obsession with dinosaurs, the way she sometimes stood at the kitchen window, wondering if her life had passed her by. Michael shared pieces of himself, to his work as a psychologist and life coach, how he spent his days helping people find clarity in their chaos. "You help people for a living," she wrote one night. "Doesn't that get heavy?" Michael replied, "It can. But I believe everyone has a story worth hearing. And when someone trusts me with theirs, it feels like a gift." No one had ever spoken to her like that. Their first phone call happened almost by accident. Sarah had typed a long message about her fears. What would happen if she left David? If her children would hate her? If she would end up alone? And before she could finish, her phone buzzed with an incoming call. She froze. Michael. Her thumb hovered, heart racing. She could decline, but something inside whispered, "Pick up." "Hello?" Her voice trembled. "Hi, Sarah." His voice was warm, low, steady, the kind of voice that could soothe a storm. "I thought maybe it'd be easier to talk this way." She laughed nervously. "Wasn't expecting this. Do you want me to hang up?" She hesitated, then whispered, "No." That night, They spoke for hours. She lay in the dark, staring at the ceiling while David slept beside her. And for the first time in years, she felt awake alive. Michael listened to every word, not interrupting, not judging. And when she cried, he didn't rush to fix it. He just stayed with her, his silence full of presence. By the time dawn crept through the curtains, she realized she had shared more of herself with this man in one night than she had with her husband in the last 5 years. A week later, Michael asked softly, "Can I see you? In person?" Her stomach flipped. She knew what that meant that once they met, she could no longer pretend this was just harmless talking. But her heart had already leapt too far to turn back. "Yes," she whispered, almost to herself. "Yes, I'd like that." Chapter 4. The Listener. The cafe on Fifth Avenue smelled of fresh espresso and warm croissants. The kind of place Sarah used to love, but hadn't visited in years. She sat at a corner table, nervously stirring her coffee, though it had already gone cold. Her hands trembled slightly as she glanced toward the door every few seconds. "What am I doing?" she thought. She was a married woman, a mother. This wasn't supposed to happen. And yet, she was here, because for the first time in so long, her heart had pulled her somewhere she couldn't ignore. The door swung open, and there he was. Michael. He was taller than she had imagined, dressed simply in a navy sweater and dark jeans. His salt and pepper hair gave him an air of quiet wisdom, and when his eyes found hers, a warmth spread across her chest. He smiled, not the practiced, charming smile of a man trying to impress, but a genuine, gentle curve that said, "I'm glad you're here." "Sarah?" he asked softly as he approached. She stood, her breath catching. "Michael." For a moment, they simply looked at each other, the noise of the cafe fading around them. Then he reached out, and she placed her hand in his. His grip was firm yet tender, grounding her in a way she hadn't felt in years. "Hi," he said. "Hi." Her laugh came out nervous, almost girlish. "This feels surreal." "Then let's make it real," he said with a small smile, pulling out her chair. They sat, and conversation flowed effortlessly. It wasn't like those awkward first dates she remembered from long ago. There was no performance, no need to pretend. With Michael, she could breathe. "So," he said after a while, "tell me one thing about you that almost no one knows." Sarah tilted her head, thinking. "I write. Little pieces. Poetry mostly. I've never shown them to anyone." His eyes lit up. "That's beautiful. Why haven't you shared them?" She shrugged. "David, my husband, never cared for that kind of thing. And somewhere along the way, I guess I convinced myself it wasn't important." Michael leaned closer. "If it matters to you, it's important. You should never let someone make you doubt that." The words hit her like sunlight breaking through clouds. Her throat tightened, and before she could stop herself, she whispered, "I don't think anyone's ever said that to me." Michael's expression softened. "Then maybe no one's been listening the way you deserve." For a long moment she couldn't speak. She just looked at him, the kindness in his eyes, the calm strength in his posture, and felt something awaken inside her. As the afternoon passed, they talked about everything. Books, childhood dreams, mistakes, hopes. He told her stories from his work, how he'd seen people transform when they finally believed in themselves. And every time Sarah glanced at the clock, she was startled by how much time had slipped by unnoticed. Hours felt like minutes. When they finally stepped outside, the city was glowing with twilight. They walked side by side down the busy street, their hands brushing occasionally, sending shivers up her arm. At the corner they stopped. She turned to him, her heart pounding. "Michael, I don't know what this is. I don't even know what it means. But I feel like I've known you forever." He smiled softly. Maybe some connections don't need years. Maybe they just are. Before she could respond, he reached out, brushing a strand of hair from her cheek. The touch was simple, almost innocent, yet it made her knees weak. For the first time in years, Sarah felt seen. Truly, deeply seen. And she knew then whatever happened next, life could never go back to the way it was. Chapter 5. A New Awakening. The following weeks unfolded like a secret springtime, blooming quietly behind the closed doors of Sarah's life. By day, she was still the devoted mother, ferrying Emma to art class and helping Noah recite dinosaur names with boundless energy. By night, when the children were asleep and David immersed himself in work or television, Sarah slipped into another world, a world that belonged only to her and Michael. Their phone calls stretched late into the night, their laughter soft, their silences even softer. Sometimes they didn't need words at all. The sound of each other's breathing was enough to bridge the miles. But it was their second meeting that changed everything. Michael had suggested a walk through Central Park on a Sunday afternoon. The children were at a friend's birthday party. David was working, and Sarah found herself free in a way that felt almost illicit. She met him by the fountain, and when their eyes met, her chest tightened with recognition. "Hi," she whispered, smiling like a teenager. "Hi," he said, and in that simple word was a tenderness that made her want to cry. They walked slowly, the autumn leaves crunching underfoot. Michael asked about her writing again, and this time, she brought a small notebook from her bag. "You brought them?" he asked, his eyes lighting up. Her cheeks warmed. "Only a few. Don't laugh." He stopped walking, his gaze steady. "Sarah, I would never laugh at your soul." Her throat tightened. She handed him the notebook, and he read silently, the wind carrying the sound of children's laughter in the distance. When he finished, he closed the notebook reverently and looked at her as though she were made of light. "These aren't just words," he said. "This is you. Raw, honest, alive. Do you know how rare that is?" No one had ever spoken to her like that. Not David, not anyone. Tears welled in her eyes before she could stop them. "I've never felt this," she confessed, her voice trembling. "Not even when I thought I was in love. With David, it was excitement, stability, safety. But with you," she shook her head, searching for words. "It's like I've been asleep my whole life and now I'm finally awake." Michael reached out, brushing his thumb gently against her tear-stained cheek. "That's because this is love, Sarah. Not duty. Not habit. Not convenience. Love is seeing and being seen. And you," his voice lowered, "you deserve nothing less." Her heart swelled, both with joy and fear. Because as undeniable as this love was, so was the reality of her life. She had children, a husband, responsibilities. The guilt gnawed at her even as her soul soared. "I don't know how to do this," she whispered. "You don't have to know right now," Michael replied gently. "All you have to do is be honest with yourself first." They sat on a bench overlooking the lake, the city skyline shimmering on the horizon. She leaned against him, letting his warmth seep into her bones. For the first time in years, she felt safe not because she was holding on to someone, but because someone was holding on to her. As the sun dipped low, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, Sarah realized something terrifying and beautiful. She had never truly loved before, not until now, and no matter how much it scared her, there was no going back. Chapter 6. The Breaking Point. The weeks that followed were a blur of contradictions. By day, Sarah carried out the role of wife and mother. Her smile practiced, her movements automatic. She packed lunches, attended school events, laughed politely with neighbors. But every time David brushed past her without noticing, every time he collapsed into bed without a word, the ache inside her deepened. And then there was Michael. Every stolen moment with him was color in a world that had gone grey. His voice on the phone, his messages that arrived at just the right time, his way of reminding her she was more than a shadow in her own life. With him, she was alive. Without him, she felt like she was suffocating. But the weight of what she was doing pressed down heavily. Guilt became her constant companion. One night, after putting the kids to bed, she sat on the edge of her mattress, staring at David's back as he scrolled through his phone. The words tumbled out before she could stop them. "David," she said softly. He didn't look up. "Do you love me?" There was a pause, then a sigh. "Sarah, of course I do. Why would you even ask that?" "Because I don't feel it," she whispered. "I haven't felt it in years." Finally, he turned to her, his face tired, his eyes annoyed. "This again? You're always so dramatic. We've been married over a decade. Passion fades. That's just life." Her chest tightened. "But it shouldn't disappear." "Not completely. I feel like I'm dying inside." David shook his head, dismissive. "You think too much. We have a good life. Be grateful for it." Be grateful. The words struck like ice. That night, Sarah cried silently into her pillow while David snored beside her. The next morning, she made a decision. When she met Michael later that week, she was pale, her hands trembling as she held her coffee cup. He noticed instantly. "What happened?" he asked gently. She swallowed hard. "I can't live like this anymore. I can't stay in a marriage where I'm invisible." But the thought of leaving, her voice broke. The kids, the judgment, the shame. What if I ruin their lives? Michael reached across the table, taking her hands in his. "Sarah, you're not ruining their lives by choosing happiness. You'd be teaching them the most important lesson of all, that love should be real. That it should make you stronger, not smaller." Tears spilled down her cheeks. "But I'm scared. I don't know if I'm strong enough." He squeezed her hands firmly. "Then let me be strong with you. You don't have to do this alone." Something in his tone steadied her trembling. For weeks, she had been living in limbo, caught between guilt and desire. But now, for the first time, she saw a path forward, not easy, not without pain, but honest. The confrontation came 2 weeks later. She waited until the kids were asleep, then sat David down at the dining table. Her heart pounded so hard she thought it might break through her chest. "David," she began, her voice shaking, "I can't do this anymore. I can't live in a marriage where I feel unseen and unloved. I've tried, I've begged, I've waited, but you won't meet me halfway." His face went red. "So what, you're leaving me? Just like that? What about the kids, Sarah? What about everything we've built?" Her tears fell freely now. "I'll always be their mother, and you'll always be their father. But staying in a loveless marriage doesn't help them. It hurts them. They deserve to see what real love looks like." David stared at her for a long moment, then shook his head in disbelief. "So this is it?" She swallowed hard. "Yes, this is it." It was the hardest night of her life. But when she walked away from that table, trembling and raw, she felt something she hadn't felt in years. Freedom. And for the first time, she believed she might survive this. Chapter 7. Love without fear. The apartment felt emptier after David left, but not in the way Sarah had feared. The silence was no longer suffocating, it was space. Space for breathing, for rebuilding, for hope. Of course, there were difficult days. Emma cried at first, asking why Daddy wasn't home for dinner. Noah grew quiet, clinging to Sarah at bedtime. And Sarah herself wrestled with waves of guilt that came crashing without warning. But slowly, Gently, life began to settle into a new rhythm. David remained in the children's lives, picking them up on weekends, calling in the evenings. Their co-parenting was civil, if strained, and Sarah knew that was the best she could ask for. But when the kids were with him, Sarah allowed herself to step into the life her heart had longed for. Michael was patient. He never rushed her, never demanded more than she could give. Instead, he offered Presence quiet dinners at a cozy bistro, long walks by the Hudson, evenings where they sat side by side, reading in comfortable silence until one of them laughed and broke the stillness. One Sunday, Sarah brought Emma and Noah to meet him. She had been terrified they wouldn't like him, terrified of what it meant to merge the worlds of her past and her future. But when Noah immediately launched into a story about dinosaurs and Michael crouched down, listening intently as though the boy's words were gold, Sarah's heart swelled. When Emma shyly showed him one of her paintings and he asked, "Will you teach me how you did that?" Sarah knew they would be okay. That night, after the kids had gone to bed, she sat with Michael on the balcony of his apartment, the city glittering around them. A soft breeze carried the sound of distant traffic and laughter from the streets below. "I keep waiting to feel regret," Sarah admitted quietly. "But it hasn't come." Michael slipped his arm around her shoulders. "That's because you chose truth. Regret doesn't come from following your heart, it comes from silencing it." She leaned into him, letting his warmth anchor her. For so many years, she had been starving for attention, affection, connection. Now she was overflowing. Weeks turned into months, and the raw edges of her old life began to soften. She watched her children thrive, saw herself smiling in ways she hadn't in a decade. And every day with Michael deepened her certainty. One evening, they drove out of the city to Long Island. Michael had packed a picnic, and they sat on the sand as the sun dipped low, turning the sky into a canvas of pink and gold. The waves lapped gently at the shore, steady and calm. Sarah lay back on the blanket, her head resting on Michael's chest, listening to the rhythm of his heartbeat. "Do you ever wonder," she asked softly, "why it took us so long to find each other?" Michael kissed the top of her head. "Maybe we both had lessons to learn first. Maybe we had to walk through the wrong paths to recognize the right one." She closed her eyes, letting the words sink deep. For the first time, she didn't feel afraid of what lay ahead. She didn't feel trapped by duty or silenced by loneliness. She felt free. And in that freedom, she finally understood what love was. Not a firework that fades after the spark. Not a contract kept out of convenience. Love was this, a steady flame, tended carefully, burning brighter with time. As the stars began to appear above them, Sarah whispered, "I've never felt this safe, this alive, this loved." Michael held her tighter. "That's because this isn't the end of your story, Sarah. It's the beginning." She smiled into the night, her heart full. For the first time in her life, she was no longer chasing love. She had found it. Love without fear. Love without end.